She thought she'd marry a handicapped millionaire. But the vows unveiled a secret. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The church bells rang out across the small town square, their echo bouncing between the walls of the old buildings. To some, it sounded festive. To others, it carried a warning. People in heavy coats hurried through the autumn wind, whispering with a mix of curiosity and judgment. They were about to witness a wedding unlike any other. A penniless young woman, barely 22, was marrying a millionaire twice her age, a man who appeared fragile and bound to a wheelchair. The bride's name was Emily. Her hands clutched a bouquet of lilies so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She had never liked lilies. They were too solemn, too funereal. But today, someone else had chosen them for her. Her family's debts, her father's medical bills, and the looming threat of losing their home had all led to this moment. A pen stroke on a contract had traded her freedom for survival. She would marry him, stay by his side, and in return, her family would be saved. When the heavy church doors creaked open, the groom appeared. He entered not with grandeur, but with silence. His wheelchair rolled across the aisle, the assistant's footsteps muffled against the red carpet. His name was Victor Hale, a man who had built an empire through ruthless negotiations, lawsuits, and hostile takeovers. Some admired him, many feared him, and most pitied him. Yet as he moved forward, his face betrayed nothing. No smile, no frown, only a calm mask that unsettled the crowd. Emily's breath caught when their eyes met. She expected sorrow, or maybe bitterness. Instead, his gaze was unflinching, sharp, as though he was dissecting her soul. For one strange second, she thought she saw amusement flicker in his expression. But it vanished before she could be sure. Around them, whispers filled the chapel. "She is doing it for the money," a woman hissed. "Can you blame her?" another replied. "Her family was drowning in debt. But how can she share a bed with a man who cannot even walk?" Someone else sneered. The cruel words clung to Emily like burrs. Each step toward the altar grew heavier, her satin dress dragging across the floor as if resisting her. She felt exposed, judged, and yet strangely defiant. She told herself she could endure the whispers. After all, this marriage was not about love, it was about survival. But then, an unusual detail unsettled everyone. Victor, the so-called broken millionaire, was not shrinking under their pity. His composure was not that of a man defeated by fate. He sat tall in his wheelchair, his back straight, his eyes alive with something almost triumphant. Emily's heart pounded harder. Why did he look as though he knew a secret no one else did? The priest cleared his throat, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. Emily's bouquet trembled in her hands. She could feel the weight of the contract hidden in her purse, the pages that bound her to this man for 3 long years. Her voice cracked as she whispered to herself, "Just survive this, Emily. Just survive." But as Victor adjusted his cuffs, a subtle smile touched his lips, one that no one else seemed to notice. It was not the smile of a man grateful for companionship. It was the smile of a man who had set a trap, and who was waiting patiently for it to spring. In that instant, Emily realized something was wrong. This wedding would not be the quiet, miserable arrangement she had expected. The vows were not going to be empty words. They were a curtain, and behind them lay a revelation powerful enough to shatter everything she thought she knew. And when that curtain finally fell, it would not just shock her. It would shock every single person in that church. Emily sat in the dimly lit study of Victor Hale's mansion, her fingers trembling as they hovered above the thick stack of papers laid out on the mahogany desk. The scent of old books and polished wood filled the room, almost suffocating in its stillness. A single lamp cast long shadows across the contract that would seal her future. She could not stop her eyes from lingering on the black ink of his signature, already marked at the bottom of the page with a cold flourish. It looked final, unyielding, as though no human hand could ever erase it. Victor remained across from her in his wheelchair, his posture as rigid as the carved armrests that framed him. His assistant had silently retreated, leaving the two of them in a silence that pressed against her chest. The only sound was the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "You should read the terms carefully," Victor said, his voice calm but firm. 3 years of marriage. Public appearances as my wife. In exchange, your family's debts will be covered, and your father's medical treatment will continue without interruption. There is no room for negotiation. If you cannot agree, walk away now." The words sliced through her. Walk away? That was not an option. She pictured her father lying in the hospital bed, struggling to breathe. She remembered her mother's weary eyes, her younger brother's shoes worn thin from use. Survival had forced her into this chair opposite Victor Hale, a man she did not love, a man she barely knew, but who held her family's future in his hand. Emily swallowed hard and tried to steady her voice. "I will sign it, but I want one promise in return." Victor's eyebrow lifted, though his expression remained unreadable. "And what is that?" "That you will never use my family as leverage again," she whispered. "You have all the power here, but let them be free once this is over." For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. It was not pity, nor was it kindness. It was a strange acknowledgement, as though she had revealed a part of herself he had been waiting to see. His lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You have courage, Emily," he said. "But remember, you are not negotiating with me. You are agreeing to terms already written." Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. Every stroke felt heavy, every loop of her signature like a chain tightening around her wrists. When she placed the pen back on the desk, she felt as though a piece of her had been surrendered. Victor leaned forward slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her uneasy. "You may think of this as a transaction, and perhaps for now it is. But do not mistake me for a man who tolerates disobedience. If you are to play the role of my wife, you will play it convincingly. Do we understand each other?" Emily forced herself to nod. "Yes. Good." He leaned back, his voice dropping to a softer tone that carried a strange weight. "Then the arrangement begins tonight." The clock struck the hour, and the chime echoed through the room like a bell sealing her fate. Emily rose to her feet, her legs unsteady, her heart racing with dread and uncertainty. She had signed away 3 years of her life, but what unsettled her most was not the contract itself. It was the way Victor had watched her sign, as though every faltering line of her name had been part of his plan all along. As she walked out of the study, clutching the copy of the contract pressed against her chest, Emily felt the walls of the mansion closing in around her. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew. This was not merely a deal of survival. This was a test, one that would demand more from her than she had ever imagined. Emily awoke the next morning in a room far larger than the entire house she had grown up in. The ceiling stretched high above her, painted with faded murals that hinted at past grandeur. Heavy velvet curtains blocked most of the daylight, casting the chamber in a twilight glow. She turned in the oversized bed and saw the contract resting on the nightstand where she had placed it, like an unshakable reminder of her choices. Her new life had begun, and with it came the unspoken expectation that she would now play the role of Mrs. Hale. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed faintly with the movements of staff. Housekeepers polished surfaces, a cook prepared breakfast, and a driver waited in the courtyard. Emily descended the staircase slowly, her hand brushing the polished banister. She felt like an intruder in a world that was not hers. Every portrait on the wall seemed to watch her with suspicion, as though questioning her right to be there. Victor was already in the dining hall, seated at the head of a long oak table. His wheelchair stood beside him, but to her surprise he had transferred himself into a tall chair with deliberate precision. His assistant lingered nearby, ready but unobtrusive. "Sit," Victor said, motioning to the chair beside him. His tone carried no warmth, but also no hostility. It was as though he were issuing a command rather than an invitation. Emily obeyed, folding her hands in her lap as the cook set down plates of eggs, toast, and coffee. She reached for the carafe and poured carefully, determined not to spill a single drop. Her hands shook anyway. Victor watched her, his gaze steady. "You are nervous." "Oh, I am," adjusting, Emily admitted, forcing her eyes to stay on her cup. "This arrangement requires more than adjustment," he replied. You will be observed. You will be judged. Every movement you make from now on reflects not only on yourself but on me." The words tightened her chest. She already felt the weight of whispers from the night before. Now it seemed her every gesture inside this mansion would be scrutinized just as harshly. She nodded, though she could not summon her voice. After breakfast, Victor wheeled himself toward the library. Emily followed, unsure whether she was expected to. The library was a cathedral of books, rows of leather-bound volumes stretching to the ceiling. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light breaking through tall windows. Victor maneuvered to his desk and began working through documents, barely acknowledging her. Emily drifted toward a corner where an old wooden chair stood beside a small table. She sat down, running her fingers along the worn grooves of its arms. Unlike the polished grandeur of the rest of the room, the chair felt lived in, familiar. She opened a book she had taken from the shelf, though the words blurred as she tried to focus. The silence grew heavy. Victor glanced up from his paperwork. "You read?" "Yes," she said quickly. "It helps me think." His eyes lingered on her for a moment before returning to his files. She could not read his expression, but she sensed something shift. The day unfolded in uneasy routine. At lunch, she accidentally dropped a fork, the clatter echoing louder than it should have. At tea, she poured too much sugar and flushed when Victor noticed. Each mistake stung, reminding her how out of place she was. Yet he never mocked her, never scolded her. Instead, his silence made her feel even more exposed. That evening, as the house quieted, Emily returned to the wooden chair with her book. She could feel his eyes on her from across the library, though he never spoke. For reasons she could not explain, she found herself wishing he would. As she closed the book and prepared to leave, Victor's voice finally broke the silence. "You are not as clumsy as you think. You are learning." Emily froze, unsure whether it was a compliment or an observation. She turned, meeting his gaze. For once, his eyes were softer, less guarded. In that fleeting moment, the mansion did not feel quite as cold. But as she stepped back into the hall, clutching her book to her chest, she reminded herself that this was only the beginning. She was still bound by ink and signatures, and 3 years stretched before her like a long, uncharted road. 2 weeks passed, and Emily began to understand the rhythm of life inside the Hale mansion. Yet just as she started to adjust, Victor disrupted that fragile balance. One morning at breakfast, he set down his coffee cup and announced, "There is a charity gala this evening. You will attend as my wife." Emily nearly dropped her spoon. "This evening? I have nothing to wear." "It has already been arranged," Victor replied, his voice even. "Your dress will be delivered within the hour. You will stand at my side, you will smile when expected, and you will not speak carelessly. Remember, Emily, appearances are everything." That night, as the driver opened the limousine door, Emily stepped out onto a carpet lined with flashing cameras. The lights blinded her, and for a moment, she froze. Then Victor extended his hand, waiting. His expression was unreadable, but she knew what was expected. She placed her hand in his, and the warmth of his palm startled her. The crowd erupted with whispers. "Look at her. She is just a poor girl who caught herself a rich husband. Lalda, she looks nervous. Clearly, she is out of place. At least she is pretty. Maybe that is why he chose her." Emily fought to keep her smile steady as they entered the ballroom. The chandeliers glistened overhead, casting golden light on gowns and tuxedos. Waiters drifted by with trays of champagne. Everywhere she turned, she felt eyes piercing through her, judging her every move. Victor, however, seemed unaffected. He held her hand firmly, guiding her as though this glittering stage were his natural habitat. When he introduced her to a group of business associates, his tone was cool but steady. "This is my wife, Emily." The words sent a shiver through her. Contract or not, hearing him claim her publicly felt heavier than she expected. Emily did her best to play her role. She nodded politely, answered questions with soft words, and tried not to reveal her discomfort. But then one of the women in the circle leaned closer and said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "Tell us, Emily, how does it feel to marry a man in a wheelchair? It must be challenging." The remark struck like a slap. Heat rose in Emily's cheeks, but before she could stumble through a response, she caught Victor watching her intently. Something in his eyes urged her to stand tall. She lifted her chin and answered evenly, It feels no different than any marriage should. Respect and honesty matter more than appearances. A hush fell over the group. Some exchanged glances, others shifted uncomfortably. For the first time that evening, Emily felt she had reclaimed a sliver of dignity. Later, as the gala wound down, Victor leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You surprised me tonight." Emily blinked, startled. "Did I say something wrong?" His lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "No, you said something true." The words unsettled her more than if he had scolded her. She looked at him, but his attention had already shifted back to the crowd. As the limousine carried them home, Emily gazed out the window at the city lights flashing by. She should have felt relief that the evening was over, but instead her heart raced with confusion. Something about the way Victor had looked at her, the way his voice had softened, lingered in her mind. The contract bound them together, yes. But tonight had been the first time she realized the world saw them as something more than an arrangement. They saw them as husband and wife. And disturbingly, for one fleeting moment, she had almost believed it too. The gala had left a mark on Emily. In the days that followed, she replayed the scene in her head, the cruel question, her own steady reply, and Victor's unexpected acknowledgement. Yet instead of clarity, it left her with more questions. What did he truly think of her? Why did his gaze linger on her in ways she could not quite decipher? Life inside the mansion continued with the same quiet rhythm, but an unspoken tension now pulsed between them. Every glance, every silence, carried weight. Emily tried to keep herself busy with books, walks through the garden, and small conversations with the staff, but she could feel Victor's presence like a shadow that never left. One afternoon, as she arranged flowers in a vase for the dining room, two housemaids whispered nearby, unaware that Emily could hear them. "She is only here because of the contract," one muttered. "Of course. A poor girl marrying a rich crippled man? Everyone knows it," the other replied. "But she has dignity. Did you hear how she answered at the gala?" "Yes, but dignity does not pay debts. She will take the money and leave in the end." The words pierced Emily's chest. Her hand trembled, and a lily slipped from her grasp, landing on the marble floor with a soft thud. She bent to pick it up, blinking back tears. She had known people would talk, but hearing it inside the walls of the home where she now lived made the wound sharper. That evening at dinner, she barely touched her food. Victor noticed. "You are quiet tonight." Emily forced a smile. "Just tired." But his eyes narrowed. "You heard something, did you not?" Her fork clattered against the plate. "Does everyone here think the same of me? That I am nothing more than a gold digger?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence filled the dining hall. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "What people think has never mattered to me. Why should it matter to you?" "Because they do not know me," Emily said, her voice breaking. "They do not know what I gave up, what I carry every day. They do not understand that I am not here for their money or for your name. I am here because I had no choice." Her outburst hung in the air. Victor's gaze softened, though his voice remained calm. "And yet, you still chose to defend me at the gala. Why?" Emily froze. She had not expected the question. Her heart thudded as she tried to find an answer. Finally, she whispered, "Because it was the right thing to do. I could not stand there and let them humiliate you." For the first time, Victor's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, and he looked away, as though hiding something vulnerable. "People have been humiliating me for years. You will grow used to it." "No," Emily said firmly. "I will not." The room grew still, their eyes locked, and for a fleeting moment, Emily felt the contract between them dissolve. They were no longer just a millionaire and his reluctant bride. They were two people standing on the edge of something neither fully understood. Later that night, Emily sat once more in the wooden chair in the library. She opened a book, but could not concentrate. She kept hearing her own voice echo in her head. "I will not." She had not meant to defy him, but it had slipped out naturally, like truth breaking free. Across the room, Victor closed a file and glanced at her. His gaze lingered longer than usual, filled with a mix of curiosity and something deeper. For the first time, he seemed less like a man testing her, and more like a man being tested himself. Emily turned another page, though she could not see the words. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was charged, alive, and full of questions neither dared to ask. The storm arrived late that evening. thunder rolling across the hills that surrounded the Hale estate. Rain lashed against the tall windows of the library, drowning the silence that usually filled the house at night. The electricity flickered, then failed entirely, plunging the mansion into shadows. Emily stood by the shelves, clutching her book, while the only light came from the faint glow of the fireplace. She hesitated before moving closer to the flames. Across the room, Victor sat at his desk, the papers before him abandoned. For once, he seemed smaller, less like the untouchable businessman, and more like a man caught in the dark. "Are you afraid of storms?" Emily asked, her voice tentative. Victor looked up, surprised by the question. "No, I have lived through worse than thunder." The fire cracked, and Emily lowered herself into the familiar wooden chair. The sound of the storm filled the room, creating a strange intimacy. For the first time since the contract, she felt bold enough to ask, "Then what do you fear?" Victor's eyes lingered on her in the firelight. He did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of its usual steel. "I fear being seen as nothing more than a broken body with a fortune attached. That is how most people look at me." Emily's breath caught. His confession struck her deeper than she expected. "I do not see you that way," she whispered. For a moment, neither moved. The storm roared, but inside the library, there was only the crackle of fire and the unspoken tension between them. Emily leaned forward, her hands clasped in her lap. "Do you know what I want most?" Victor tilted his head. "Tell me." "A simple life," she said. "A small home, mornings without fear. A family that laughs together. Nothing grand, nothing gilded, just peace." Something shifted in Victor's expression. The faintest smile touched his lips, not cold, not calculated, but genuine. "Peace is rarer than gold," he murmured. The firelight flickered across his features, softening them. In that instant, Emily saw not the ruthless millionaire, nor the man bound to a wheelchair, but someone unexpectedly human. Then, as lightning flashed outside, he placed one hand on the armrest and pressed upward. Slowly, carefully, he shifted his weight, rising just enough to steady himself against the wooden chair beside her. Emily froze, her eyes widening. You can stand?" she gasped. Victor's face tightened. Not for long, not without pain. He lowered himself back into the chair, the moment vanishing as quickly as it came. Emily's heart raced. She wanted to ask why he had hidden this, why he kept the world believing otherwise. But the look in his eyes silenced her, an unspoken plea, a fragile truth revealed too soon. The storm raged on, but the space between them had changed. For the first time, Emily felt the boundaries of their contract blur. The mansion no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them dared to name. The storm passed by morning, leaving the Hale estate washed clean, its gardens glistening with raindrops. But inside Emily, the storm had not settled. She could not forget the sight of Victor pushing himself up, standing with effort, leaning against the chair. It was proof that the image he showed the world was not the full truth. Questions clawed at her, yet she kept them buried. Days later, as Emily walked through the town square, whispers followed her again. She had ventured out alone to buy fresh flowers, hoping for a moment of normalcy. But she quickly realized there would be no escape. There she is, the contract bride. She must be counting every dollar she will inherit. "I heard his health is failing. She will be a widow before she turns 25. The words stung more than the cold wind. Emily held her head high, but inside, her heart ached. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, that her life was not a game of greed. But dignity held her tongue. When she returned to the mansion, Victor was waiting in the parlor. His assistant handed him a newspaper folded to the society column. Emily froze when she saw her own photograph printed on the page. The article speculated shamelessly about her motives, calling her a penniless girl playing queen for fortune. Her cheeks burned. "They are tearing me apart." "Oh." Victor's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "Public opinion is cruel. It feeds on scandal. You will need to endure it." Her voice cracked. "And what about you? Do you believe them?" The question hung heavy in the air. Victor leaned back, steepling his fingers. For a long moment, he did not answer. Finally, he said, "Belief is irrelevant. You signed the contract. That is what binds us." Emily's throat tightened. his coldness cut deeper than the newspaper's lies. For the first time, she wondered if she could bear the full weight of this arrangement. A week later, Victor's family announced plans for a grand wedding ceremony. Though legally bound by contract, they wanted the public spectacle, a lavish display to silence gossip and cement appearances. Emily sat in her room staring at the invitation cards embossed with gold, her stomach twisted. "I cannot stand before hundreds of people, knowing what they whisper about me," she murmured. When she confronted Victor, his response was curt. "This ceremony is not about you. It is about the Hale legacy. You will play your part." Emily's hands shook. "I do not know if I can do this." For the first time, Victor's composure slipped. He looked at her, truly looked, and his eyes flickered with something fierce. "You must, because on that day, everything will change." The weight in his tones silenced her protests. She could not understand what he meant, but his words echoed inside her. Everything will change. Alone in her room that night, Emily pressed her palm against the windowpane, staring at the city lights in the distance. The contract had trapped her, the public had condemned her, and now the wedding loomed like a stage she did not want to stand upon. Yet Victor's promise, his strange certainty, haunted her. Deep down, she felt that whatever secret he carried, it would not remain hidden much longer. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and cloudless, the kind of day most brides would call perfect. Yet for Emily, the sunshine felt cruel, exposing every doubt that churned inside her. The gown draped over her frame was beautiful, but heavy with meaning. Every pearl, every layer of lace, felt like a chain binding her to a role she no longer understood. The church was overflowing. Guests filled every pew, their voices buzzing with curiosity and judgment. Reporters lingered outside, cameras flashing as carriages and luxury cars pulled up. To them, this was not a sacred vow, it was a spectacle, a show staged for wealth and reputation. Emily walked down the aisle, her bouquet trembling in her hands. She could hear the whispers, sharper than ever. "She is marrying him for his fortune. Poor girl, condemned to a life with a cripple. Or perhaps lucky. She will inherit it all." Her steps faltered, but she forced herself forward. At the altar, Victor waited in his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. She dared not meet his eyes for long, afraid of what she might see or fail to see. The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Emily barely heard the words. Her heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out everything else. When it came time for her vows, her voice shook but held steady. "I promise to honor this union, as best I can." The phrasing was awkward, uncertain, but it was all she could give. Then it was Victor's turn. The church grew silent, expectant. All eyes were on the man they believed broken, bound to wheels, dependent on others. Victor gripped the arms of his chair. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself upward. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emily's breath caught as he rose to his feet, unsteady but strong enough to stand tall before them all. Gasps echoed. Someone cried out. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Victor's voice carried clearly, steady and commanding. "For years, the world has pitied me. They have looked at this chair and decided who I am. They believed I could not stand, could not fight, could not love. But today, I choose to reveal the truth. I am not here to be pitied. I am here because I have found a woman who, even in the face of scorn, chose dignity. Emily, I do not ask for your obedience. I ask for your heart." "Oh." Emily stood frozen, her bouquet slipping slightly in her hands. Her mind spun. This was no longer the ceremony she had braced herself for. The whispers behind her had died completely. The entire congregation watched in stunned silence. Victor turned fully toward her, his eyes locking with hers. "This is not a contract anymore. This is my vow to you, without conditions, without lies. The choice is yours now. Will you take it?" Emily's lips parted, but no words came. The world around her seemed to tilt. The contract, the judgment, the nights of doubt, all of it had led to this impossible moment. The truth stood before her, unhidden at last. And every eye in the church waited for her answer. The church remained silent, the kind of silence that presses against the skin, heavy and expectant. Emily's breath trembled as she stared at Victor standing tall before her. The man the world thought broken had shattered that illusion in front of everyone. His words still rang in her ears. "I ask for your heart." Her bouquet slipped from her hands, the lilies scattering across the marble floor. She did not care about appearances anymore. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice carrying farther than she expected in the hushed chapel. "You tested me, you let me live under judgment, and you let me believe this was all a prison." Victor's gaze did not waver. "Yes," he admitted, his voice steady. "I built walls around myself, and I used you to test if anyone could see beyond them. I was wrong to do it this way. But Emily, I was never indifferent. From the beginning, you showed me a courage I had not seen in anyone. That is why I stand before you now, not as a man with power, not as a contract, but as someone asking for your forgiveness." Gasps rippled through the guests. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, their judgment replaced by uneasy fascination. The priest cleared his throat, unsure whether to intervene. Emily's eyes burned with tears, her voice cracked. "You cannot buy my heart with money, and you cannot trap it with signatures." She reached into her purse, pulling out the folded copy of their contract. Her hands shook as she held it up. "This paper has chained me for months, but it is not stronger than truth." Victor stepped closer, surprising everyone with his steadiness. He took the contract from her hands, tore it in half, then in half again, letting the pieces fall like snow at their feet. The crowd erupted with gasps. "I release you," Victor declared, his voice echoing in the vaulted space. "You are free, Emily. Free to walk away from me. Free to choose a life without judgment. Free from this arrangement." Emily stared at the torn paper on the floor, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the moment. Freedom was finally hers. She could leave. She could return to a life of simplicity, though shadowed by debt and hardship. Or she could stay, not as a prisoner of circumstance, but as a woman who had been offered a choice. She looked up at Victor. His face, once unreadable, was now laid bare. Fear, hope, and something raw that no amount of wealth could disguise. He was waiting, not commanding, not demanding. For the first time, he was simply a man before a woman, vulnerable in his truth. Emily's tears spilled over. She reached for his hand. "I do not need your fortune, Victor. I need your honesty. If you give me that, then you already have my heart." The crowd broke into murmurs, some astonished, others moved. The priest, regaining his composure, stepped forward. "Then let this union be blessed, not by contract, not by wealth, but by choice." Victor sank to one knee, not as a performance, but as a pledge. No more lies, no more tests, only truth, only love. "Oaf." Emily bent down, lifting him gently back to his feet. Their hands clasped, and together they faced the congregation. The whispers had changed. They were no longer words of scorn, but awe. As they walked out of the church, sunlight poured through the doors, bathing them in gold. Emily felt the weight of judgment lift, replaced by a fragile but undeniable hope. What had begun as a contract had ended as a vow, one born not from paper, but from the strength of truth and the courage to choose love.